I feel like this episode is kind of like, remember when you were young, maybe if you're my age, you would turn on the TV and it would say, this is a very special episode of this sitcom, or this is a very special after school special or something like that. So I feel like this is a very special episode of The Mindful Leader. Taj M. Smith is a transgender person who is also a transgender educator. I've been wanting to have someone on for a long time to talk about transgender identity. It's not, as some may think, to convert or indoctrinate or anything like that. My purpose is, some of you may never meet or know that you've met a transgender person. And there's so much information and disinformation and misinformation about transgender issues. I wanted to have an actual transgender person on the program to talk about that. It's one perspective. It's their perspective. You may disagree, but at a minimum, I hope you'll listen. Get ready for Taj M. Smith, the Mindful Leader. Taj Smith is a speaker, transgender educator, and founder of Rooted Respite. I say respite. You say respite or respite?
I do say respite.
Respite. All right, me too. All right. Which is a virtual community serving activists, DEI practitioners, faith-based change makers, and others committed to creating a more equitable world. As a transgender educator, Taj has shared his story across the country in front of thousands of people. Taj explores the spaces where spirituality, justice, and identity overlap. He is a Black transgender man who is deeply curious about the ways faith and identity interact to produce hopeful futures. He has a creative passion for music. We hold that in common, and I'll ask you about that in a little bit, and literature. Particularly science fiction and fantasy. He holds a BA in politics from UC Santa Cruz, which I love Santa Cruz. It's a great city, and a Master of Divinity from Harvard Divinity School. So Taj is no joke with a Master of Divinity from Harvard Divinity School. That's serious work. Taj's work has been featured in Sojourners, Huffington Post, and the Harvard Divinity Bulletin. His own transition story was published in Austin Hartke's book, Transforming the Bible and the Lives of Transgender Christians. He's also a frequent podcast guest, and we are happy to have him on The Mindful Leader. Welcome, Taj. How are you today?
Oh, I'm doing great, David. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. I appreciate your time. I know you're a busy guy, and but this is an episode I've really been looking forward to. It is a sensitive and sometimes volatile topic, but I wanted to talk with somebody who's able to bring some education into this arena for us. I know people listening will have all kinds of thoughts and opinions and beliefs on this topic, but I kind of want them to hear at least your perspective. It's one perspective, but I think it's a good perspective. And since you actually have experience in this, I think you're the perfect person to talk to. But before we get into my long list of questions, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, how you got to doing what you're doing now. Just let everybody know a little bit about who you are.
Sure. So I grew up in a town called Vacaville, California. It's the midpoint between San Francisco and Sacramento. And that environment, it's an agricultural town that kind of went through a lot of development during the 90s and the dot-com boom. So it saw a lot of rapid growth, but it used to just be a farm town. And so, I was growing up, I was one of the few Black folks that I saw on the regular basis, and definitely one of the few out queer folks in my high school. So this was the early 2000s when I was in high school, and seeing a lot of like the mega churches and religion kind of being a huge part of my friend circles, and a lot of that anti-LGBTQ attitude kind of carried over. And
Right.
one of the larger churches in town actually was running a group for kids that were queer. And so I saw a lot of my friends go from being these really loving and precocious, outgoing, like kids, mostly boys, because
Yeah.
those were the ones who got targeted.
Right.
But I saw them go from being those loving, caring kids to just angry and just really, really sad.
Yeah.
So I realized that if I wanted to make a change, then and if for me in my own faith story, for me, if God was part of anything that made these kids change into being something other than loving and other than like the playful, beautiful beings that they were, like I didn't want any part of that, you know?
Right.
And so I just threw myself into activism, LGBTQ activism, worked a ton on same sex marriage, worked a ton on transgender inclusion, came out as trans in my last year, technically my last year of college. And went through a whole it's wild because I had been on a track to be a lawyer because I had given up on faith, but
Right.
working on the no on Prop 8 campaign in California at the time, um uh faith, the church community was actually where I saw these really brave conversations happening. So like I started going to the church down the street from the UC Santa Cruz. It had this giant rainbow Jesus fish on the marquee. So I figured it's probably a safer place for me to be. And that community ended up being just like a champion for me all throughout my transition process. And while I was there, realized that I had a call to ministry, discerned that, and completely did a 180 and changed from going to law school and fast tracking to being a senator to ministry, which
Yeah.
is where I am now. I mean, I think of what I do as ministry, and I
Sure.
feel like ministry takes on a lot of different forms. So
Right. Excellent. Well, that's a great background. I had my first actually worked really hard on my first question, which I don't usually do because I usually know the people a little better, or they've got a book or something. I just kind of pull the first question kind of out of that relationship or the book. With this, I wanted to get the first question just right, but I'm actually going to make that my second question now because of something you said. And I don't know why I didn't think of this, but you talked about your transition. Um, give everybody a little bit of insight, and your story is just your story. Everybody has a different story, but give everyone a little insight on what that is like from the standpoint of the people around you. Like you decide that you are transitioning, and then what happened? Like how what happened with the people around you? How were you treated? What was your experience? Give us a little insight into that.
yeah, I mean, it was a really mixed bag. I think because I was in college at the time, I mean, UC Santa Cruz being the activist university that it is, a lot of my friends were on the forefront of like working for justice, and so they took it really well. But a lot of folks from home didn't take it so well.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, this was something that I had been discerning for years. I mean, I felt like I knew from a very young age. And when I finally was able to accept it, uh, I first it came with a name change, so I asked everybody around me to start calling me by a different name, and then it came with pronouns, and then like I asked everybody to start calling me a different name and different pronouns, and then from there I decided like which other pieces of the transition were going to be really relevant for me, and like for for everybody that transition piece is different, but a lot of times that social piece, that the name and pronouns, that's like the one of the most important aspects
Yeah.
of honoring somebody's identity. So, you
Right.
know, I felt like people for the most part accepted it, and the ones who didn't, I we had long conversations about why they couldn't accept it.
Mhm.
And in some cases, I lost friends.
Sure.
Um, and but I always made new ones.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, it was definitely a mixed bag of reactions, and I think that most of the people who I kind of could tell who was going to accept it and who wasn't.
Right. Yeah.
um,
You kind of know ahead of time. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, people show you little bits about who they are in that way.
Right.
So,
Right. Yeah.
uh,
Okay. So here's my actual first question. And it still, I think, kind of ties into what we were just talking about. But one of the things that just breaks my heart the most is the violence that occurs towards transgender people.
mhm,
Listen, I disagree with people who aren't supportive of transgender people, but surely we can all agree that transgender people don't deserve violence, right?
mhm,
But apparently we can't all agree on that because the violence occurs.
mhm,
Since 2013 in the United States, more than 200 transgender and gender non-conforming people have been killed.
mhm.
And that's the stat I got, I think, is the Human Rights Commission stat. But given that violence, maybe tell us if you experienced any of that and why does that make it so important for us to understand this issue?
Yeah, I've been really fortunate in that I haven't really experienced any of the violence. Um, I know a lot of I have friends who have, and it always affects the community.
Right.
When somebody is killed, when somebody is beaten up or assaulted, um, it makes the rounds through the different local community and then national, and we always grieve. Um, and grieving is a part has become an integral part of being trans. And it's no one wants to live that way. um, um, but yeah, I mean, you said it, like since 2013, 200 people. I think even between in just like for context, like this year alone, we've seen over 500 some odd anti-LGBTQ, anti-trans pieces of legislation introduced in Congress. And prior to that, I mean, in 2015 was the previous highest record at 37. So
Yeah. Escalating dramatically. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So tell us, what does it mean to be transgender? So that maybe, I mean, I think people have a general idea, but tell us what being transgender means.
Sure. So being transgender means that you identify as is a transgender person is someone who identifies differently than the gender that they were given at birth. So, a baby is born, the doctor looks at that baby and makes an announcement based on that baby's anatomy. And then that baby either grows up to identify with that announcement or doesn't. Um, and trans people are the people who don't.
Yeah. There's, I know one of the terms I hate that people use is alphabet soup when they're talking about LGBTQ and IA and all of the other plus all the other things. And people kind of use the term alphabet soup often in a derogatory uh, manner. Um, you mentioned pronouns earlier. I'm going to ask you about that in a bit, dig into that a little more. But I want everyone to know, if they haven't already figured it out, that we're not talking about L today. We're not talking about G. We're not talking about B. This we're sticking strictly on the transgender topic for this episode. Um, those other topics are needed and important. But is there anything? I don't really have a question there, but is there anything you would add about the whole LGBTQ quote unquote alphabet soup thing? What would you say about all of that?
Yeah, I'd say that using the phrase alphabet soup, it often kind of carries this tone of I don't care. And so
Mm-hmm.
whenever I hear people say that who aren't part of the LGBTQ plus community, because I
Right,
mean it's kind of one of those jokes like that's in crowd. um,
right, right,
but people outside of that, it just kind of communicates like an I don't care enough to learn about this.
right,
And I'm only doing this because I'm only saying this because it's what I've been told is okay to say,
right. Yeah,
which you know, it's I mean the at the very least it's disrespect.
right,
um,
right.
at the worst case it's hostility.
True.
So you know, like feel like people want to feel seen, people want to feel respected, LGBTQ plus folks included in that. So um for allies, all you allies who are listening, like um if you hear that term, if you hear somebody say alphabet soup, you can ask them why they use that. What, like why they won't take the time to actually say the whole acronym because, you know, that kind of stuff matters.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate. Well, I won't use all those letters because they're always adding more letters, and I can't keep up with them. Taj is just too much, and they're just shoving all this down our throat, and I just can't keep up with all of that. So, how would you respond to someone who says that?
I'd say well, that's what the plus sign is for. The plus sign indicates that there are more letters to be added, that these identities are growing, they're changing. It's an ever shifting landscape. And you know, if you feel like it's being shoved down your throat, try growing up as an LGBTQ person and then being from pretty much birth being told that you're supposed to be straight, watching every single Disney movie growing up, every single storybook, every single TV show that has romance. Like that's what's being shoved down people's throats. But
Taj, I thought Disney was propagandizing our kids and turning them all gay and trans.
oh, I guess that's what's being said now, right? That's the talking point.
So your experience is a little different watching Disney movies. Yeah.
Very much so. Very much so. I mean, everything. I mean, one of my two favorite Disney movies when I was a kid. Well, I'll say three favorite because I really loved Sleeping Beauty. Um,
Hmm.
and you know, I grew up with this idea that Prince Charming is a person that you get to find, and he'll come and he'll save you, and you know,
Right.
and every girl gets to have her Prince Charming.
Right.
And never in my childhood did I hear that it might be okay that if you don't want a Prince Charming.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. What a concept. Yeah.
Right? Right? Even if you're not like LGBTQ in any
Sure.
way, like to have the idea that you need this other person to complete you, to
Right.
save you is problematic.
Right.
But you know, just for me as a like growing up, um, it didn't even occur to me
Yeah.
that
Right.
like yeah. But then you know, also Aladdin and the Lion King, same sort of thing.
Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. So obviously, I have a whole lot of questions I'm going to ask you that I think will help educate people on this topic. But when people want to learn more about being transgender, or I keep wanting to use the word transgenderism, but that doesn't feel appropriate because then it sounds like alcoholism or something like that. When people want to educate themselves on the topic, what are some good ways to go about doing that, and what are some bad ways to go about doing that?
Yeah, I it's hard because the internet makes it so makes information so available. I mean, I used to just say, like, you can just go online and do a Google search, and you'll find a transgender influencer or a blog, and you'll read that person's posts, and but
Yeah.
that's not the case anymore. Um, but for like either way, I'd say that the first thing anyone should do to learn more is to find a transgender person and talk to them. Ask them about their story. Be curious about who they are. Be curious about them as a person and not just as the embodiment of an identity, Because I mean, this I feel like the word gets thrown around a lot, and it's now being associated with something that's become a boogeyman of sorts. But we're people. I have a whole range. I feel the full range of emotions. I
Yeah.
experience joy. I experience grief. I have a history. I have a future. I have a present. Like, we're multifaceted and just as complicated as any human being.
Right.
So get the human aspect of it. And there are, like, with the proliferation of information on the internet, there are so many trans educators online. You can find blogs by trans people who are sharing their stories, Instagram influencers, online communities. There's even a Reddit forum called Ask Transgender, where people can go and ask
Hmm.
the questions that they have, and a trans person will answer them.
Oh, that sounds great. So one of the things I think about when you mention asking or talking to a transgender person, for some reason, it makes me think of the Floyd murder happened, and the Black Lives Matter movement really came to the forefront, and there were some people who saw themselves as allies who wanted to get to know Black people better, learn more about Black people, and then there was this backlash a bit of people saying, "Hey, it's don't come up to me and ask me all your Black questions just because I'm your one Black friend. Um, it's exhausting. It's not my job to educate you. Educate yourself."
Mhm.
So if someone meets or knows a transgender person and they want to talk to them, what would be your advice on how to go about that discussion?
Yeah, I would say, like, coming at them in that very human way is the most important aspect of it, and just letting them know and letting them know that you're interested in them as a person, and not just as a walking representation of an identity, the
Yeah,
walking representation of the boogeyman.
yeah. And then, oh, I had a thought pop in my mind and then it fell out. That happens with me sometimes. Um,
That's fine.
it may come back to me. Oh well. Okay. So tell us maybe a little bit about, I don't know exactly how to ask this, but maybe the history behind transgender identity, maybe some science behind it, whatever. What would you tell us about kind of the best word I can think of is the history of transgender identity?
Yeah, so I mean, transgender is a relatively new term for a very old and ancient identity.
Right.
Trans people have existed from the beginning of humanity. There are records of ancient societies that had multiple, more than two genders, three genders, sometimes four and five genders. I think it's the Talmud, the ancient Jewish text, that references, I want to say it's between six and eight genders. And these aren't they had words for them because they saw them walking around,
Right.
so, like, this isn't something that's new. It's something that's very, very old. And it's just the language that we have for it right now is relatively new.
Yeah. Yeah. What would you say to someone? We were talking about the number of genders and stuff. People who say, "Look, science shows us there's male and female, and that's all there is, and you're one or the other." And there might be a few anomalies of intersex people, but like, basically there's male and female. And I don't know why everybody can't just understand that.
I'd say those few anomalies also matter, and that their identity is not something to just be taken lightly. um, it's something like 10% of babies born each year that are born with intersex characteristics. Um, so it's not. It's like these are numbers that when you look at the percentages, it's not. It doesn't seem very large, but then you hear that like that equates to like a million.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like
People.
it's a lot of people. It's something like 1% of the US population identifies as transgender. That's over a million people.
Right.
Like, so putting numbers to these actual percentages and like thinking about it in terms of like, okay, well, if the population, like, there are more trans people than the entire population of Wyoming.
Right. Right.
you
Yeah.
know,
Maybe,
it's
maybe, they
it
could,
like
maybe they could get a congressperson or something. That was representation. Yeah. Um, talk a little bit. We kind of talked a little bit about this. You had your experience, but talk about for maybe the quote unquote average transgender person. What is the um, loss of family or reaction of family and that impact? What is it like? What happens, and what's the heavy impact of that?
or well, I can say that, I mean, that's going to be different for every trans person.
Sure.
I know I have, like, for me, like my family, my mom came around eventually. It took her a little while. But she is accepting of me and seeing that I am happy and thriving.
Yeah.
um, and that's all she wanted for me when I was a kid. So like, she sees if this is what's going to do it, then great.
Yeah.
um on the flip side, like, I have friends who don't talk to their parents anymore. Their families don't speak to them, like they can't go home.
Yeah.
So like, it runs the gamut of experience, and like there's not really like an average sort of
Sure.
experience in that way. um but I can say, like, in states that have higher percentage, or higher percentages of religious beliefs and religious believers,
Mhm.
the populations of like homeless LGBTQ kids, homeless trans kids, tends to be relatively high.
Mhm.
Um, so, it's like the loss of family is something that is a huge piece of the narrative for queer folks in general, trans folks especially. I don't know if you've seen the show Pose. It was an
No.
FX show that really, that I think documented very well the experience of queer folks of color in New York in the 80s and early 90s.
Mhm.
And there's they broach that topic through the lens of a few different characters, but you can see, like, with each of those characters, how it affects them and how it comes back to this idea of chosen family being like
Right.
the crux of support and community
Yeah.
in amongst LGBTQ folks.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, you touched on religious beliefs there, and this is something I wanted to talk about, especially given your experience and Master of Divinity. One of the main reasons that many people are against transgender identity is for religious reasons.
Mhm.
There are multiple religions that, in many people's view, speaks out against it, especially Islam and Christianity.
Mhm.
I I don't want this show to be like, I'm not a religious program, right? And I'm
Mhm.
not advocating one faith or another, or for faith at all, or against it, whatever. I'm neutral on this subject on this program, but obviously you have a Master of Divinity from Harvard Divinity School, and this is a subject that you've looked into extensively. Tell us a little bit about how you would address those objections.
Yeah, I'd say it's again, religious texts have gone through the translation on top of translation on top of translation. And I mean, I can speak specifically to Christianity. I don't
Yeah, feel free.
I
Yeah,
don't know too much about Islam, but
yeah,
um I know that there are supportive imams out there and there are not supportive imams. So
right,
I'm assuming that they're having conversations of their own in Muslim communities. Um, but I know in the from like a Christian lens, like the Bible has gone through so many different translations and translations of translations that the original meaning of the text and the cultural context of the text is it's not the final product that we get that we read. Like
right,
I
right,
pulled down the New Living Tradition translation or the New Living Translation, and it's not gonna it's somebody's interpretation of what was said.
right,
uh so to rely so heavily on word for word what is said in the book, one, it takes it completely out of the cultural context, which that informs a lot of what is happening in the book itself.
right,
And two, there is so much more to faith and to belief in God than following the law by the letter.
right,
And I think that's one of the most important lessons that Jesus really brought in the New Testament. He worked on the Sabbath. He overturned the tables in the temple. Like he was a rabble rouser. He stood up to the religious authorities who were uh, saying that the only ways to live were by this very one specific interpretation.
right,
Uh, so we see that religious struggle even in the text, and to completely just gloss that over um, does does the does the text a real disservice and does the faith a real disservice, because there's a lot of room in there for wrestling and for asking these big questions and for exploration of what a relationship with God looks like when you have these big questions. And it just completely gets shut down when you're only going to the book for answers.
right, right. Taj, I suspect, given I live in Oklahoma City. We're the buckle of the belt here. Um, that there are some people listening, if they're listening, um, we will never get them to be open-minded on this subject. They have a view that um, the Bible's clear and plain. It's the inspired word of God. There's no room for any wiggle anywhere in this. And I'm not mocking those people. People have all kinds of faith for all kinds of reasons. But I'm trying to ask you a question versus me saying what I want to say on it. Uh, how what would you say to those people who are just like very hard? I mean, you already said a lot, but maybe for those really hanging in there, like, no, Taj, I disagree with you. I don't think there's any quibble. Jesus said, "Go and sin no more," and transgender identity is a sin, and there's male and female, and that's all there is. Maybe what would you say to the hardest line of those friends?
I'd say, isn't it wonderful that we live in a place where there is freedom to believe whatever you want to believe? And I hope you have a blessed life, a beautiful and blessed life.
Okay, so this um, leads into a couple other questions. Before we get into those, we like to have what's called the music minute. And in the music minute, we learn a little bit about, we feel like we get to know people better by learning the music that they enjoy. So you have a passion for music. Taj, tell us a little bit about, sorry, I'm moving my notes here.
No worries.
Whoops, wrong way. Tell us a little bit about the music you love, maybe some songs, bands, concerts, artists, whatever. Tell us a little bit about the music that Taj loves.
Oh, it is a wild mix. I think I put together a playlist for a D&D character I'm playing not probably a couple nights ago I did this. And it had everything on it from like Explosions in the Sky, which is like math rock, post rock, kind of that like really airy, open, like lots of guitar, lots of reverb, and really complicated time signatures, to like Eric Satie. like, so I mean, I grew up playing instruments and I was a band
What do you
kid.
play? What do you play?
I play guitar and I play trumpet.
Okay,
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, so I was a band kid all throughout school. I almost majored in music and yeah, so it's a huge passion of mine. I think probably hands down one of my all-time favorites is Prince.
He's my number two. Prince is amazing. Yeah.
Oh, just incredible showman, incredible just like songwriter, just musical ear, like instrumentalist, everything. He just had it all. Oh,
Sure did. Yeah. Yeah, that was a big loss losing Prince. Yeah.
yeah.
I am happy though that the family is continues to release because he had thousands and thousands of songs in the archives, and so I like that they're continuing to put stuff out. So that's exciting. Yeah,
Yes.
I know they're reissuing Diamonds and Pearls with like 45 new tracks. So that's yeah, that's coming this fall. So that's going to be I think 45 is 40 something new tracks. So I'm like, yay. That makes me super excited.
Yes. I know he had a vault of just
Yeah,
stuff that
for
he
sure.
recorded just for him.
Right, right. Do you have any favorite songs, like any songs in particular that you just really love?
Uh Prince or just in general?
In general.
Okay.
But that does make me wonder what's your favorite Prince song.
My favorite Prince song is actually off one of his newer albums. So it was a 20 I guess new-ish 2007, 2006 Musicology.
Great
Um
song. Yeah, great song.
oh yeah, that album just I love that album.
Yeah.
Um but like favorite songs just in general, one I always come back to that I think is like definitely on the soundtrack of my life is You Get What You Give by the New Radicals.
Yeah,
um,
yeah. Good song.
uh, like lots of 90s alternative on there. So like plenty of Oasis and the Toadies,
Cool.
the Cranberries, Zombie is definitely on that list.
Yeah.
um, and then you got like some like 1980s funk, some like Cool in the Gang, some Earth, Wind and Fire, some of their later stuff, Stevie Wonder, um, Rick James.
Yeah.
um, let's see. Uh, geez, favorite songs there. Um, I'm like it's that classic musician's dilemma where as soon as you
So
ask,
many.
just the
Yeah.
mind goes
Right. Yeah.
blank.
Yeah. I
Just like I've been
understand.
playing guitar for 20 something years, and as soon as anybody asks me what songs do I know, I'm like, oh, I don't know any songs.
Right. Right. I know a few chords. I don't know any songs. Yeah. Yeah. I got it. Yeah. Well, that's great. I feel like that helps us get to know you a little bit better. By the way, my favorite Prince song, two of my favorites, has so many, but Starfish and Coffee and Peach. Peach just rocks. I love the way that song, especially the live version of that really rocks hard. But anyway, all right. So we were talking about religion and those views on transgender identity. It makes me want to ask, talk to us about conversion therapy and some of the issues around conversion therapy.
Yeah, conversion therapy
Maybe
is
describe what it is for someone who may not know what conversion therapy is.
yeah, so that's conversion therapy is oftentimes under the guise of helping someone who is LGBTQ, but really it's to convert them to being straight. So it's this idea of a lot of times what they'll do is have you form negative associations with LGBTQ identity to force someone to be straight.
Right.
Um, and it just wrecks people.
Yeah.
It just absolutely wrecks them. Um, I mean, there are. It's hard to talk about because that's one of those things that, like, when you've seen people who have gone through it and you, like, and they're close to you and they talk about what they went through,
Mhm.
um, it's just absolutely heartbreaking. Um, I know the movie Boy Erased.
Yeah, that's a good movie. Yeah.
Yeah, that does a really good like in-depth look at what conversion therapy can look like in conversion therapy camps, especially in like
Yeah.
in some of the southeastern states. Um, but I mean, ostensibly they're hosted by churches usually and like extremely religious camps, or extremely religious groups that will just gather these kids and have them memorizing passages of scripture and uh, uh, in an effort to uh, quote unquote pray the gay away.
Right. Yeah. One of the things I think it's important about it is how it doesn't work. Like there's always, I see sometimes someone will post something about someone who it worked on and they're cured, and they tout these people as examples of what a great success it is. What they don't talk about is the 99 that it destroyed in the process. Any thoughts on that?
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. I mean, they want to prop up that one uh, so that they can say like we get results. But
Yeah.
if your result is 1 out of 100, then it doesn't work. It's a failed
Right.
experiment. There's a reason that most of the American medical community now uh, is against it,
Right.
and it's because it has shown to be detrimental to people's mental health, is detrimental to people's physical health in a lot of ways, in the ways that mental health can can affect physical health. um and it's in a lot of cases it's these sorts of beliefs and practices that cause folks to be to think about self-harm.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I wanted to talk about that. Um, we have the mental health in general. People who are even thinking about the fact that they may be a different identity, a different gender, there's a very high rate of self-harm in those people. And then, you add conversion therapy on top of that and those kinds of things. What um what are some ways we can help the mental health aspect of this?
uh I think what it comes down to is just really like being able to see a person, and I don't just mean like being able to like look at a person and like and as they're standing in front of you. I mean like
Yeah.
yeah, like see them, like see the universe in behind their eyes,
Yeah.
like um because I people tell you who they are. um, every day people tell you who they are, and it's and I think it's Maya Angelou quote that says, "When someone tells you who they are, believe them." And usually that is in terms of like if someone tells you that they're a narcissist or something, it has a negative connotation, but it also has a positive connotation as well. If someone tells you that they are trans, if someone tells you that they are um, if someone was born if the doctor said they were a girl, but at 3 years old they start telling you they're a boy, there's really no harm in saying okay and letting that go where it goes. um
Yeah, I think that's a good way of saying it. Just let it play out, because that'll either go away and they were just having a thought experiment or whatever, or it doesn't go away. And that's where the mental health issues comes in, is when it doesn't go away and people are working overtime to convert.
right, right. I always say that children will remember who supports them. Children, children, as they grow up, they will remember who uh, who validated them. They will remember who encouraged them. They will remember who showed them love. They will also remember who didn't.
Yeah. Yeah. That kind of leads us into the political climate for transgender people. And I know there are a lot, you mentioned like 500 laws proposed, and many of them are being passed. Um, a lot of those laws are targeted at 18 or under.
Mhm.
Not all of them, many of them are targeted at adults. I mean, just any kind of transgender support. They just want to, get rid of all of it. But give us your perspective on um, how to navigate that with children in particular, and then what's the political climate and all of that. And there's a very broad question for you. Sorry.
No, no worries. I mean, it's a huge topic right now. It's the gender affirming care.
Yeah.
Um, so I think there's this assumption that gender affirming care automatically means surgery when there's a whole lot of other aspects that come with it.
Yeah.
Surgery is just one piece, and nobody is advocating for surgery to be performed on children. You
Right.
know, at the most, it would be puberty blockers, and puberty blockers are well documented as safe. They're have been around for over 30 years, and have been tested and mostly used on cisgender kids, so kids who identify with the gender that they were given at birth.
Yeah.
In cases where like maybe a young girl is going through puberty early and like too early and she doesn't want that, then you use a puberty blocker to kind of delay it, and so that can experience puberty with the rest of her peers.
Yeah.
um, yeah,
Yeah.
so I mean, these are well documented in their use, and perfectly safe.
Right.
So um, people talk about these experimental treatments, and they're not experimental.
Right. Yeah. Well documented. Well, a lot of history behind them and so forth. Yeah. Um, and I'm looking at our clock and all my questions here. What are I want to dig into the names and pronouns things. I think this will be a easy question. Um, you mentioned how important it is to uh, affirm someone's new name, their pronouns. There's a whole concept called dead naming you can talk about. Just talk a little bit about the names and pronouns and all of that.
Yeah, so I mean, names have huge significance, right? Like, I mean, your name is the first thing that people call you when you're brought into the world, right? Like it's a big deal. So like for a trans person who is naming themselves and is uh confirming and affirming their identity by announcing this new name, then only if they're met with resistance, then that's just like an immediate shutdown, you know. um like, and using people's names and pronouns is just a really easy way to to say that you are that even if you don't understand what's going on, that you support that person.
Right.
Even if you don't get the concept at all, if you're not on board with it, whatever it may be, if you care about that person, show them that you care by using that name and those pronouns. Because otherwise, it's one of those cases where if you might think it's not that big of a deal, and it might not be that big of a deal to you, but to them, they're going home. They're going home, and they're probably upset about it. They might be upset about it. They are probably going to talk to their friends about it. They're going to talk to their therapist about it, and they're very much weighing whether or not you are a person they want to keep in their life.
Right. Yeah. Whether you're safe, whether you're a safe person. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of explain what dead naming is for people
Yeah.
who don't.
So dead naming is when you continue to use the name and pronouns that a person was named that a person used before they told you their new name and pronouns.
Yeah. Yeah. Because to the transgender person, they've selected their new identity in many ways, and names is one of them. And when you keep referring to that old name to them, that person's dead.
Mm-hmm.
Like often, like I don't want to speak for everyone, but that's kind of where the term dead naming came from. It's like, that person doesn't exist anymore. This is who I am now. And so when you keep referring to someone in their old name, it has a very big impact on them.
Right. And it's also to say that that person never really existed because that person was probably a front.
Right. Yeah.
That person was a mask that that individual had to wear in order to move through the world and be accepted. And now, as they're coming into themselves, they are affirming their identity. They are announcing to the world who they actually are. And then, if like to be that dead name is someone who was never really alive to begin with.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point, because what happens is if I'm a parent or a sibling or a cousin or even a friend, when someone says that person never existed or doesn't exist anymore, we start making it about us. And we say, oh, but I have this whole history with that person, and I don't want to give that up. And you mentioned grief earlier. There's grief on both sides of the equation here for people. Maybe speak to that element.
Yeah, so I mean there is a lot of grief on both sides, and um it's not like that person just stops existing, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And each individual trans person will tell you uh, about their relationship to their memories and themselves like prior to their transition. Um, but I mean, for the most part, like for trans people, the minute we start using the new name, the minute we start using those new pronouns, that's us accepting and embracing ourselves and choosing to live as fully as we possibly can. Because otherwise, like there's that whole like that the person that they might have been before uh spent a lot of time thinking about being somebody else.
Right. Right. Yeah. Okay. I have a question that's just kind of like a wide open question. I have no idea where you might go or take this, but my question is, what are some of the biggest myths about being transgender? Maybe something we've already talked about, maybe we haven't talked about it, but what are some of the biggest myths that you'd love to just correct for people on the whole transgender identity issue?
Oh, geez. There are so many.
I need an episode 2 if we
Today on Mythbusters. No. But I think one of the biggest myths, um, There are two that I'm going to talk about. So there's one that's really circulating around right now, is that we are sexual predators and that we're perverts. Um, that is 100% not true. Um, and to apply that like just blanket statement to a whole like group of people, it really only serves the purpose of demonizing that group of people.
Yeah.
Sure, there are individuals everywhere who are going to do that. But you know, we don't go through saying like that, and because one person did that thing one time, that this whole group of people is like that. We're all different. I mean, as I said, like we are we have complex lives. We experience the full range of emotions. We are everyday people. I mean, the fact that you're going to be able to, the idea that, oh, I guess there are three myths I'm going to talk about, that you'll be able to know if somebody's trans.
Yeah, let me on your first one, let me just add something to that real quick. I see this person. I love TikTok, and you whatever you watch, it kind of increases your algorithm. And there's a person, maybe I've started following them, who's a transgender person, but they have started a database of child predators, like people who are accused of and convicted of child predators. And just I want to say in this current year, maybe so far, there's been like well over 200, something like that, across the country. And they're tracking, are they transgender? Are they LGBTQ? Other demographic information about them. Out of all of those people, there's like one transgender person. And if I remember right, there's even some like question about that. But there's one out of the several hundred. Over 10% are religious leaders who are pastors and youth pastors. And it's fascinating to me how we say, oh, transgender people are so incredibly dangerous because they're pedophiles, when the actual statistics show, and actually she breaks down different people, police officers are another high group on the list, but the number one demographic on the list is religious leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no panic in the country about all of and we're not just talking about Catholic priests here either. We're talking about the majority of these are evangelical people. And so, like, we need to get our data straight in this conversation. All right, this is David. I'm interrupting the interview. I'm cutting in here because I was quoting statistics out of memory and off the top of my head, which I don't do very often, but it just came to my mind as Taj was talking. But I want to correct the information. So the website that this person uses to track this data is whoismakingnews.com. At the date of our interview, here are the statistics. There were 2,400 cases in the United States of people committing crimes against children. 306 of those were people who had religious employment. That includes pastors, youth pastors, staff people, Sunday school teachers, anything that relates to them being involved in the church. It doesn't include people who just attend church. So religious employment was 306, which is by far the highest category of people. Transgender people were 3, and drag queens were 0. So this person, you can go look at the data yourself. You can download the source data at this website, whoismakingnews.com. But here's a chart that kind of categorizes it. When you put all of the different types of family or known people, that becomes the highest, but you're adding multiple categories to that section. And then other is the second highest, and then religious employment is the third highest. And then we have teachers, and then police, and then politicians, which, by the way, the vast majority are Republican. and I'm not trying to make a political statement here. It's just when you have the religious community and the Republican Party working together and excuse me, and so publicly to pass laws against transgender and drag queens because they feel that they're a threat to children. This data shows that they're not a threat to children, um, hardly at all, if at all. But those in religious employment and politicians are much higher than either one of the transgender or drag queen groups. So anyway, I just wanted to share that and just correct the data that I misquoted, but the point is exactly the same and the ratios are very much the same of what I stated. So I just wanted to clarify that. Okay, thanks. Back to our interview with Taj.
Yes, yes. Thank you for bringing that up. I I want to find this person because
I'll send you the information after we
yeah,
talk because
please
it's a
do.
fascinating database. Okay, so your myth number one was that they're child predators. Myth number two.
Myth number two is that you will be able to tell a trans person walking down the street. In some cases you can, in other cases you can't.
Taj, can I tell you, just through this conversation and looking at you, I would have never guessed, like
Yep.
never in a million years. And that's one of the issues when going back to the political thing, people saying, well, we want you to use the restroom of the uh, gender you were born with. Do
Mhm.
they really want you walking into a women's restroom? Like people have not thought this through.
Exactly. They sure don't want me walking into a women's restroom. Even before my transition, I would get asked if I was in the right restroom. So,
Right.
like who is this serving? Who like it's really just trying to enforce on someone's idea about what genders are supposed to look like, but like,
Right.
gender looks different on everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's a there was a rumor going around. I saw this news story a few months back about like Daniel Radcliffe, the guy who played Harry Potter,
Mhm.
and his girlfriend, who is she's pregnant, and like congratulations to them. But people
Right.
were saying like she can't be pregnant because she's transgender. She's not transgender.
Right. Right.
Like, no,
Yeah.
she is a cisgender woman who is pregnant.
Okay. So what was your third myth?
The third myth is that trans people all have really sad stories. Um,
That's a
yeah,
fascinating. Yeah.
yeah. I feel like there are a lot of moves being made amongst trans folks to shift the narrative from trans suffering to trans joy. Just because like as much as suffering is part of anybody's narrative and suffering is something that is imposed upon us because of the conditions of the world, there are also a lot of instances in which we laugh, we have a really great time at amusement parks.
Right.
We graduate from high school, we graduate from college, we are parents, we have children, we have pets. There are
Yeah.
so many reasons to celebrate life, and we do celebrate life in a lot of the same ways that you know most folks do.
Everybody else does. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I might add to that, it makes me think now that you have transitioned to who you feel like this is who I actually am, I'm sure that brings with it a lot of peace and relief and joy in that way.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So much joy, so much excitement. I think when I always say that being trans didn't stop my like struggles with mental health, but it did give me the courage to explore them and start to heal from them. um,
Yeah.
because I figured if I could embrace this thing that I had run from for so long, if I could love that and affirm it, then anything is possible.
Which is really loving yourself.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. We're running out of time. I've got uh, one more question for you. It's kind of a two-part question. Um, what should a parent or friend do if someone comes out to them as transgender? And then second, what should someone do if they think they may be, if they may be an actual different identity than what they were born with?
Uh, so for parents and friends, I'd say the first thing you should do is say, thank you for telling me. Thank you for trusting me enough to tell me that. And then say, I support you. And then say, uh, how can I support you on this journey? How can I be with you on this journey?
Yeah.
And a lot of times they won't know the person who just came out won't know the answer to those questions, but just the fact that you're asking shows them that you are someone that they can talk about this with.
Yeah. Yeah. And then what about for people who feel like they may be a different identity?
I'd say find folks who are that identity and talk to them. And like find a supportive friend. So, like if there's one person in your life that you can tell everything to and you think you can tell them this, do that and then see if they'll go shopping with you, like go to thrift stores and just like try things on,
Yeah.
feel like the that discernment phase, that stage of really trying to figure it out. It looks different for everybody, but one of the most important pieces of it is playing with dress and trying on that
Right.
that identity and doing it with a safe person and in a safe space.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good advice. That makes me okay. So I lied. I have another question. So maybe tell us, because we haven't really dug into your story, and I didn't really want this episode to be about your story, but maybe just take a couple minutes and tell us a little bit about how you experienced, because I'm thinking about people who are thinking about maybe I'm a different identity. What was it like for Taj? Like your experience of that discovery? Maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I mean, it was something that I struggled with all as a kid. I think I voiced something along the lines of "Mom, I'm a boy," when I was 3 or 4, and was met with a quick "No, you're not," and shut down. So I wrestled with that all throughout growing up, and through that, I developed a pretty severe case of depression and anxiety, social anxiety, that really stuck with me all throughout college. Um, in college, when I actually started meeting more LGBTQ folks and more trans folks specifically, that's when I something clicked and I was like, okay, I know this person who is trans and I care about this person. It was kind of that initial for me going from being uh someone who was afraid of transgender people because I thought that I might be transgender and thought that that was a bad thing, to being like, okay, there's this one person that I care about. So what does that mean? How can I support this person? Okay, so I know how to support this person. What if I start going to this group? um, and it just sort of unfolded in a way that kind of felt like it was out of my hands. I think it really hit home for me when after Prop 8 passed in California back in 2008. Um, and I fell into a really, really dark place, and had been thinking about like ways to end it all and all of
Mm-hmm.
that. Um, I went to a conference with it was just this huge conference of LGBTQ campus organizers and leaders for throughout the entire University of California system, and I think throughout the West Coast. But I sat down in a completely empty row on this first day of this conference trying to get my stuff together and get my thoughts together. And this person sits right next to me. And I'm just thinking, geez, why'd you have to sit right next to me? This row is completely empty. But this
Personal.
person, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, oh, geez, okay. But this person starts talking to me and they asked me for my name. And I told them my name. And they looked at me and they said, okay, so that's your name, but what do people call you? And that moment was just it was a deer in headlights moment for me because I had been thinking about it. It was like an itch in the back of my mind. But I didn't think anything of it. And this person just saw right to it. And at the time I had been thinking about names, she's like, I guess you can call me Taj. And they just said, okay, I'll call you Taj. I was like, wow, if this complete stranger can do it, surely my friends can.
Right, right.
And when I told my friends, I'm again, for the most part, supportive. And they were just like, okay, great. The ones who weren't made a swift exit, stage right. And yeah, and it just went from there.
Yeah, yeah. Awesome. Any final words of wisdom for people listening? Anything else you'd like to say?
I yeah, trans folks are here. We're not going away. This isn't new. It's very old, and it's gonna keep being a thing. We're everywhere, and even if you can't support it, you gotta learn to live with it.
Right. Yeah. Well said. I love, for me, the theme that really sticks out in my mind as I reflect on what we just talked about for the last hour is see the person. That just really stands out to me, is see the person. I love that. Taj, how do people get a hold of you if they want to connect with you, if they want you to come speak for them, those kinds of things? How would they get in touch with you?
The best way is find me on LinkedIn, Taj M, as in Michael Smith, and where you can visit rootedrespite.com. Look me up there. I think it's just got a landing page up for a mailing list, but that's another way to get a hold of me.
Great, great. Well, Taj, this has been a wonderful discussion. I don't know if it changes anybody's mind, but at a minimum, I feel like we've done our best to educate people today. So I deeply appreciate your time and your energy and passion on this. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed that unique and powerful discussion with Taj M. Smith. If you want to reach out to Taj, you can connect with him on LinkedIn, Taj M. Smith. You can also check out his website, rootedrespite.com. We're going to have a time of meditation here in just a moment. But before we do, I would like to ask you if you found this episode beneficial, helpful, or any of the other episodes you've listened to of The Mindful Leader helpful, do us a favor and go out and rate the podcast. Let people know that you enjoyed it. You can leave a comment, and that will be helpful for us in spreading the word about the Mindful Leader podcast. You can also visit pendulumcoaching.com. We have a weekly email newsletter there you can sign up for, and you can also ask me to come speak at your event. I speak on mindfulness and emotional intelligence and leadership topics. So feel free to invite me to come. I can do a keynote or a workshop, whatever. We can just talk to you about what fits your needs. Let's have a time of meditation. As always, if you are driving, please be careful and cautious and safe. Wherever you are, if you're sitting in your chair, you might want to just place your feet on the ground, maybe place your hands in your lap, your back up against the back of the chair. I'd invite you, if you feel comfortable, to close your eyes. Always like to take a few breaths to kind of get us into the meditation mode. Let's inhale together. And exhale and inhale and exhale and inhale and exhale. You can just breathe normally. Taj talked about how important it is in this topic, but I think as well in any situation in life that we see the person for who they are, not who we want them to be, wish they were. See and accept them as who they are. Then you can define your relationship from there. But see, just as you want to be seen, as you are, really see people for who they are. I'd like you to take a moment and let's just reflect on what we heard in that interview, what stood out to you. And let's just reflect on that interview. I haven't done this before in a meditation, just reflecting on the interview, but such an important topic. Just take a few minutes and reflect on what you heard. As we think about seeing people for who they are, take a moment and reflect on how you respond when who people are, how they behave, how they think, how they act, how it doesn't align with your, maybe your values, maybe your instincts, maybe who you thought that person was. How do you respond when people don't align with what you expect of them? I'd like you, if you would, to think for a moment about how you like to be received as who you are, what you think, what you believe, how you behave. Think about how you want others to treat you for your views, your beliefs, your identity. How do you want to be treated? If you would, I would like you to reflect now on what you can do in relationships, how you can act when people don't align with your views, your perspective. Maybe they surprise you, maybe they disappoint you. What is a positive way to react in those times? Now think about what you can do to see the person better for who they are. What are some steps you can take to see people as they are? Let's inhale and exhale. Inhale and exhale. And one more time, inhale and exhale. You can open your eyes if you like. I want to thank you so much for hanging in there all the way to the end with us on this very special episode of the Mindful Leader podcast. Be sure to connect with Taj M. Smith on LinkedIn. Let him know that you heard him on the Mindful Leader podcast. You can also check out his website at rootedrespite.com. Be sure to tell your friends about us, and we will see you next time on The Mindful Leader.